As you might know by now, the main topic of this channel is the late Roman Empire, and more precisely, how exactly did the Roman Empire fall and what would we have seen as eyewitnesses during that time? What would it have been like to live in those dark times, and what could we have witnessed if we would have a time machine and could travel back to that fascinating but also frightening epoch where a whole civilization fell? We have already tried to establish what we would have seen in the city of Rome in 476 AD and shortly before the Gothic Wars started, so around 536 AD, and have found that the city of Rome actually did not change much in those decades after the so-called fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. But while the city of Rome stabilized under the kingdom of Odoacer and later even to some degree experienced a flourishing period under the kingdom of Theodoric, the fall of the Western Roman civilization and culture in other parts of the Western Roman Empire was not as benign. Literary sources from the mid-5th century onwards become really rare. We have, for example, Sidonius Apollinaris as a very important source for the situation in Gaul in the mid-5th century, where thanks to his writings we can imagine how life must have been in these chaotic times, during the dying years of the Western Roman Empire. Of course, we will make separate videos on that topic. But there is a fascinating piece of literature that has survived from that era until our modern times, which gives us a glimpse of how life must have been in those last years of the Western Roman Empire in the provinces of Raetia and Noricum Ripense, north of the Alps. The document in question is the Vita Sancti Severini, the life of the Holy Saint Severin, written by Eugippius. Eugippius was born in North Africa around 465 AD, and we don't exactly know how or why he came to Italy and later to Noricum, but what we do know is that he became a monk in Noricum Ripense. He joined Severin's order of monks probably at some point in the early 480s AD, and it was thus that he became a biographer of Severin and a possible disciple of him. We don't really know if Eugippius actually knew Severin personally, because Severin had died already in 482 AD. But the biography he wrote about this holy Severin and his dealings in the Noricum of that time gives us a unique glimpse into how life must have been back then north of the Alps when the empire died. Biography is maybe not the correct word, as some real eyewitness accounts are mixed with fantastical elements, such as Severin's magical deeds and miracles, so this document cannot always be taken seriously. But as an account for the situations of everyday life back then, it is considered to be genuine. Severin himself was probably born around 410 AD in southern Italy, or the back then still Roman province of Africa. He arrived in Noricum at some point after the death of Attila the Hun in 453 AD. From Eugippius's writings, we are being told the bleak picture of Eastern Raetia and Noricum in those times, and are told that imperial control had almost entirely vanished and that barbarian raids were commonplace. Not too long before, the legendary Magister Militum of the Western Roman Empire, Flavius Aetius, had defeated the rebellious Barbarii at Augusta Vindelicorum, modern-day Augsburg in Germany. The Barbarii were rebellious bands of peasants and slaves who used the instability and chaos of those times to rebel against the imperial rule, as they had been the lowest of the social ladder of the Western Roman Empire and felt exploited by the regime of the Western emperors. We will talk in detail about the Barbarii and their contribution to the fall of the Western Roman Empire in detail in future videos. But we can already say this, namely that these Bacchaudi added to the chaos of those times, and many peasants, slaves, and others of the lowest social classes joined the rebels, and the Bacchaudi often even joined the barbarian invaders in order to escape from the unfair social order of the late Roman Empire. Aetius defeated them at Augusta Vindelicorum in 430 and 431 AD, and then also campaigned against the Jutungi, a Germanic tribe that was harassing the region in those times. This was the last time where there was some kind of ordered imperial control of Raetia and Noricum, because after that the Hunnic hordes of Attila came from the east, and the ensuing chaos of those times completely left Raetia and Noricum devoid of larger Roman imperial armies. We can now read in the Vita Sancti Severini how in the 450s AD any semblance of imperial authority had vanished from north of the Alps, because there is no mention whatsoever of a Roman governor or of any imperial military commander in Noricum Ripense. It seems also that the provinces of Raetia and Pannonia had completely fallen to the Germanic invaders. We can read in the Vita that an effective defense system against the barbarian invaders had already ceased to exist. Throughout the time that the Roman Empire existed, the soldiery of many towns was maintained at public expense for the defense of the frontier. When this practice fell into abeyance, both these troops and the frontier disappeared. This means basically that after the provinces had been overrun by Germanic invaders, they were effectively not part of the Western Roman Empire anymore, and thus tax collection could not occur. This erosion of the tax base in turn caused a domino effect where not enough money could be raised to support any army in these provinces north of the Alps. Hence, an imperial army effectively ceased to exist probably not too long after Aetius's last efforts in the 430s. We are told in detail in a wonderfully evocative story of the Vita Sancti Severini how exactly this situation must have felt for the last garrisons of the Western Roman imperial army. In one account, an imperial garrison remained in the city of Batavis, or sometimes also called Batavia, modern-day Passau in Germany. But since the tax collection system in Raetia and Noricum Ripense had, as we said, ceased to exist, this garrison did not receive any pay after some point. This must have been between the 450s and the 470s. So the garrison, in order to collect their pay, sent some of their men south over the Alps towards Italy. However, we are told they never arrived at their destination. According to the Vita, the soldiers were killed during the journey by the barbarians, and their bodies were later found washed up on the banks of a river. No more imperial pay ever reached Batavis. This is a very vivid account, and we can imagine how insane it must have been during these times. It certainly was no fun being a soldier of a garrison defending the leftover cities of the Western Roman Empire, abandoned by the emperors, abandoned by the last Western Roman armies, venturing through dangerous territory on long journeys in order to get the deserved pay. The garrisons effectively became independent militias who tried to defend the local population of the cities of these provinces. We are told that later Batavis was given up due to constant pressure by continued barbarian raids from the Alemanni, and the whole population was evacuated eventually to Lauriacum, a larger and better fortified old legionary fort. Lauriacum is modern-day Enns in Austria. The barbarian raids had become so bad that effectively venturing too far from the city walls of these last defended bastions of the Roman population was a very dangerous business. For example, we can read in the Vita that 2 men were seized by barbarians in broad daylight within 2 miles of the city of Favianis, modern-day Mautern in Austria. They had only left the city walls of Favianis in order to gather some fruit for the harvest, but that apparently already had been too far. We can see through Eugippius's accounts that those were very dark times indeed, and it was really the end of a civilization, an apocalypse, where an old society died and the remaining garrisons were trying to defend the last bits of Roman strongholds against the ever more encroaching Germanic invaders. So if next time we are talking about the end of the world and the end of civilization and watch a movie like Mad Max, we should remember that it already happened over 1500 years ago, because make no mistake, this was a Mad Max-like situation, minus the cars of course. And please subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss any future videos on all kinds of fascinating topics from the late Roman Empire, with, I can promise you, many unknown facts which you will not hear from any other YouTube channel about Roman history. Gratias agut tibi, amici. But there were also some glimmers of hope, and this is where Severinus of Noricum shone brightly like a small but persistent flame amidst the growing darkness. We are told that he was able to help the provincials in their dealings with the invaders in a number of ways. On one occasion, the Vita tells us that he had a vision of future events which saved the city of Lauriacum from a surprise attack, which of course cannot be taken fully seriously. However, what can be taken more seriously is how he managed to gain the respect of the kings of the Rugi and Alemanni, that were the main Germanic invader tribes in these areas. He, for example, once used his influence to negotiate the release of 70 captives from the barbarians. Apparently Severinus was very skilled in diplomacy. How exactly he achieved what he did, we do not know, but probably he exploited the superstition of the people in those times, and certainly mentioned that God would become very angry with the barbarians if they continued to harass the Roman population. He certainly helped the Roman population with his skills, but unfortunately he could not stop the complete collapse of the last remaining Roman fortified cities. For example, we are also told that the city of Tiburnia escaped capture only by paying off the barbarian besiegers, while Batavis had to be evacuated and Joviaco was captured by the Heruls, who made a surprise attack, sacked the town and led many into captivity. The barbarians even hanged a priest who did not heed the warnings of Severin to abandon the town. He probably was hoping that he could negotiate with the invaders, but apparently he was not as skilled a diplomat as Severin. We are also told that not everyone was evacuated from Batavis to Lauriacum. Some refused to leave the city, thinking that they could reason with the barbarians. In this instance, it was the tribe of the Thuringians, but this turned out to be folly, as the last inhabitants of Batavis were either killed or led into captivity. But lastly, also Lauriacum fell, since they had by now been surrounded by barbarian tribes from all sides. Severinus helped to negotiate the resettlement of the inhabitants with the king of the tribe of the Rugi, and they were resettled into towns that were already part of this new Rugian territory. Apparently though, here we also have a positive account for a change, where the inhabitants of Lauriacum that were resettled into towns of the Rugian kingdom lived peacefully along with the Germanic invaders. This is quite fascinating, and here we can see how some of the remaining local Roman population was absorbed into these new Germanic kingdoms. Many of the old Roman cities were kept as they were. However, of course, as now the early Middle Ages would begin, the towns would slowly transform from Roman garrison towns and legionary forts to early medieval cities in a process that would take hundreds of years. But then again, other accounts are less peaceful. For example, we are told that the city of Comagene entered into a treaty arrangement with a group of barbarians who provided the town with a garrison of soldiers. This might at first glance look like a good deal, since the Germanic soldiers in theory would provide protection against other Germanic raiders, thus effectively replacing the Roman garrison that was no more. But we are told later that the townspeople required Severinus to drive the garrison out with a miracle, so we can quickly understand that the so-called protection by the barbarians equaled more a harassment and was probably highly unpleasant for the Roman population of Comagene. Severinus of Noricum, this skilled diplomat and defender of the last Romans north of the Alps, died around the year 482 AD. By that time, the whole of Noricum Ripense had already fallen to the barbarians. It must have been around that time that Eugippius joined Severin's monks, possibly at Favianis, modern-day Mautern, the town where Severin had died in 482. However, the situation at Favianis also deteriorated quickly, so that this town also had to be evacuated. We are told that around that time, Odoacer, the new king of Italy, the very same who had deposed the Western Roman Emperor Romulus Augustus in 476 AD, gave an evacuation order for all remaining Romans north of the Alps to withdraw south to Italy, which was not being constantly harassed by barbarian raids. Odoacer had in fact managed to consolidate power there, and Italy enjoyed some peace during those times, at least until the Ostrogoths arrived in 488 AD on orders of the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno. Odoacer defeated the Rugians in the former province Noricum Ripense, probably around 487 or 488 AD, and evacuated the remaining Romans south to Italy. Eugippius was part of these Romans. He and other monks of Severin's order arrived at Castellum Lucullalum at Neapolis sometime later in 488. A long time ago, in the 1st century BC, a villa had been constructed here by Lucius Licinius Lucullus, and the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III had a massive fortification around the villa be built. It is said that Romulus Augustus himself came to Castellum Lucullalum after he was deposed in 476. It is believed that Romulus Augustus was still alive in 511 AD at the Castellum, but probably was already dead when the Eastern Roman Empire arrived with Belisarius in 536 AD, since he was not mentioned in any source of that time. Eugippius thus lived for probably quite many years side by side with a former Western Roman emperor, which is, at least for me, a very fascinating thought. Apparently he also was a quite known person during these times and even had correspondence with Cassiodorus and the Pope Symmachus. He wrote the Vita Sancti Severini most likely in 511 AD at Castellum Lucullalum and died there in 533, so that he was spared the dark times that would soon fall upon Italy with the Gothic Wars only a few years after his death. Thanks to him, we have the Vita Sancti Severini, which gives us a fascinating, if also frightening and disturbing glimpse into the apocalyptic situation of those dark times in Raetia and Noricum, where truly a civilization had fallen and a post-apocalyptic Mad Max-like situation had emerged. So the times were indeed dark, and the Roman Empire did indeed fall, as we can see, and this fall was highly unpleasant for the Roman population north of the Alps and very probably also in other parts of the former Western Roman Empire. Fortunately, in our time, Mad Max has not yet happened, and hopefully we will be spared another apocalypse so that we can continue making lots of videos on late Roman history. And you can even support us on Patreon, so that with your help we will be able to greatly increase the production quality of our videos, for example by creating custom animations and drawings. Also, you will gain many perks by becoming a Patreon, such as being part of our Discord server community, and for higher Patreon ranks, even suggesting video topics or participating in exclusive live streams. And I would like to thank all viewers who support this channel, and of course especially our dear Patreons and the people that support this channel via PayPal donations. Thank you very much. Gratias agut tibi amici. I say thank you, dear viewers and friends of Roman history, until the next video, and bene vale amici.